History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. A quote by famous American writer Mark Twain. For you and me, this may be our first time having a social distance, quarantine, and wear a mask because of the pandemic. But did you know that about 100 years ago, humanity was doing exactly that? According to the US National Archives, the flu caused the deadliest pandemic in recent history, killing more people than World War I did. Today, I will be informing you all on the 1918 influenza pandemic, and more specifically on how the virus turned into a widespread pandemic, how it was handled, and its similarities with today's ongoing pandemic. So, in my first main point, I will be informing you all on how the virus turned into a widespread pandemic that infected over 1/3 of the world's population. This main point will consist of the origin of the virus, as well as how World War I and the environment in 1918 helped it spread. So, John M. Barry, a well-renowned historian, states that the virus was transmitted from birds in farms in Kansas, and then moved its way towards U.S. Army camps and major cities, and then around the world when U.S. soldiers were shipped overseas to fight in World War I. The censorship of information due to the ongoing war also helped propel the virus into becoming a widespread pandemic because it left many people clueless about what was going on, or they didn't know what to do. Essentially, the virus was left undisturbed in the beginning of the pandemic. According to the article 1918 Influenza, Mother of All Pandemic, it also states that the environment in 1918 helped the virus spread because people were interacting with each other from all over the world. It was dense and humid, there was bad ventilation, and people were gathering in tight indoor areas. And these were the conditions that the virus thrived in. So, in my first main point, we learned how the virus was handled, how the virus spread in 1918. Moving on towards my second main point, I will be informing you all on how the virus was handled in 1918. First of all, the virus was neglected in the beginning of the pandemic because the symptoms were fairly mild and there was the ongoing war. Control methods were finally implemented in the middle of the pandemic once people began to die within several hours. It was so severe that the average lifespan dropped by 12 years. It was also difficult managing the pandemic because there was no scientific or pharmacological understanding. There was no medication, no vaccine, and no acquired immunity. Aspirin was being prescribed, but it was being prescribed at very high doses, and all it did was temporarily relieve the symptoms, and it caused many people to die of overdose instead. So, according to USHistory.com, a non-pharmacological approach had to be used. That consisted of wearing a mask, social distancing of 5 feet, quarantining at home, closure of public spaces such as theaters and schools, constant sanitation of public area surface such as hospital beds and metro chairs, and even spitting could have gotten you in legal trouble. Eventually, the virus went away once people developed herd immunity, meaning society was infected so much that some began to build an immunity towards it. So, in my second main point, we learned how the virus was handled in 1918. In addition to the non-pharmacological approach, my third main point points out other similarities between the COVID-19 and the 1918 influenza pandemic. First of all, government officials made matters worse by ignoring early warning signs, by constantly downplaying the pandemic, and by being indecisive and inconsistent with the information and the actions that they provide. For example, some areas allowed people to get together and businesses to open, and other areas did not. This was very inconsistent and made people distrustful. Since people's day-to-day life was heavily impacted by both pandemics, people decided to take matters into their own hands. Essentially, some people decided to even build anti-mask groups due to political reasons or ignore social distance protocols. Also, in both pandemics, the economy was devastated. Many people lost their jobs, and now not only did people have to fear a killer virus, but now the effects of losing a home or providing food. So that is one of the biggest reasons why businesses and schools in both pandemics prematurely opened. So, in my third and last main point, we learn similarities between the COVID-19 and the 1918 influenza pandemic. In conclusion, I informed you all on the deadliest pandemic in recent history, the 1918 influenza pandemic. This speech consisted of how the virus turned into a widespread pandemic, how it was handled, and its similarities with today's ongoing COVID pandemic. Remember that today we see the flu as something minuscule or trivial, but this was never the case this wasn't always the case back then. Thank you all for listening to me and have a wonderful day.